I, Volume 2, Part 1, Story 11, Noblest of All. That's what it says. Let me get my trusty bookmark so my eyes go, ooh. Okay. Part 1, Story 11, Noblest of All. Shirt always makes me want to choke. Okay. The next few years were very happy ones for Joseph, or Zephaniah. I put the Zephaniah because that's his Egyptian name. Okay? Well, that's what it says in the King James, and that's in the Bible. That's what it translates. Okay, let's get back to this. It must have seemed to him as though he had become out of the dark, a long dark tunnel into a world of sunshine. Not only did Pharaoh give him a lovely home, a splendid chariot, a beautiful wife, but the people of Egypt loved him. They thought he was the most wonderful governor they had ever had. Never had they been so well off. For 7 years in succession, they had the greatest harvest they could remember. The earth brought forth by handfuls. The government collected 1/5 of all the crops. Nobody grumbled. All the land had so much that they didn't know what to do with, and none had a care for the future. Only Joseph knew what was coming, and he drove all over the country in his chariot, arranging for the storage of the grain. In every city he built storehouses and filled them to the point of bursting. At first he tried to count all the bushels of grain that were brought in, but finally gave up. They were too much. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, very much until he left numbering, and it was without number. Then suddenly the 7 good years ended. In the 8th year, when it came time to reap a harvest, there was almost no crop at all. Ooh. Everything had dried up, and the 7 years of famine had begun. All over the earth, harvests failed, and soon millions of people were facing starvation. And all countries came to Egypt to Joseph, or Zephaniah, to buy corn because the famine was so sore in all the land. Joseph held on to his stores of grain as long as he could, for he knew they must last for many years. But finally conditions became so bad that he decided to open his storehouses and sell the corn to the hungry people. How glad they were then that he had been so wise and careful. Up in Canaan, Jacob was beginning to get worried over the famine. In all his life, he had never seen anything like this. There was no grass for his cattle, no grain to make bread for his large family. His harvest, too, had failed, and now his supplies of food was getting dangerously low. At last he called his sons together and said, "Behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Get you down thither, and buy us some from thence, that we may live and not die." So 10 of the sons set out for Egypt, leaving only Benjamin behind with his father. They followed the same trail that Joseph had traveled 22 years before, where they sold him as a slave to the Ishmaelites. Many times they must have thought about the wrong they did to him and wonder if they might meet him in Egypt, if indeed he was still alive. But only one thing that did not expect, that was to find him the chief man in Egypt next to Pharaoh. On arriving to Egypt, they inquired where they could buy grain and were told they must first obtain permission from the governor. So they went to see him and bowed low before him, never supposing for a moment that this fine big man, dressed in splendid robes of a high Egyptian official and speaking in an Egyptian language, was their own brother. But Joseph recognized them. He was glad to see them, but before letting them know who he was, he decided to find out if they had changed during the years since they had sold him into slavery. So he put on his harsh voice and accused them of being spies. This frightened them badly, and very humbly they replied that they were not spies, but merely sons of an old man in the land of Canaan, and and all they wanted was food, they said. But Joseph kept saying, "Ye are spies." And then, of course, has an illustration of them before you. And he spoke Egyptian, so they didn't know, and that, you know, and then they only know him as Zephaniah. He finally puts him in prison for 3 days. Perhaps this was to let them see what prisoner what a prisoner was like, or just to give himself time to think of what to do next. What he wanted most of all was to see his younger brother again, his own dear Benjamin. But how could this be brought about? Finally, he thought of a plan and sent for his brothers, then suggested that one of them should remain in prison while the rest took what corn they needed and returned home and come again with Benjamin. They agreed, and Joseph chose Simeon to be the hostage. As soldiers bound him and the others looked on trembling. Then a strange thing happened. Suddenly it came over the brothers that all this trouble had come to them come because of the way they had treated Joseph long ago. And they began to say to one another, "We are very guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us and would not hear, and we would not hear. Therefore, in this distress come upon us." And Reuben answered them, saying, "Spake I not unto you, saying, Do not sin against the child? And ye would not hear." Though they did not know, Joseph understood every word they said. So they were speaking in Hebrew, and he understood every word. Yeah, because in the movie they did have a translator, and then if you watch the movie, you'll see that he will, you know, stop the translator even speak, even though it's in English, speak in Hebrew. Okay, my mind went to that movie because I like that movie. And he was so moved by their sorrows that he, for what they had done to him, that he turned himself away from them and wept. Dear tender-hearted Joseph. So he cried. And I'm going to cry. Sorry. Okay. Because this is the sad part. Okay. On their way home, the brothers found all the money they had paid, for the corn that was inside their sack. They couldn't understand how it could have gotten there, and it made them more afraid than before to return to Egypt. They had not, they did not know that Joseph, out of the love for them, had himself ordered that their money should be returned to them. Sorry. When they arrived home, they told Jacob all that had happened and how the governor of Egypt had said that they could have no more corn unless they took back the youngest brother back with him. Benjamin, Joseph, said Jacob, never. Joseph is not Simeon. Joseph is not, and Simeon is not. And ye will take Benjamin away? All these things are against me. He got really, really, really badly upset. Sorry. Alright, let me get my composure, because that's the sad part of the story. And again, Jacob refused to let Benjamin go to Egypt. But at last, when all the food was gone, he had to give in. Take also your brother, he said, and arise and go. And the Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may send away your other brother and Benjamin. If I be bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. In other words, if he takes Benjamin, he takes Benjamin and Simeon. And so he let out, so they set out again, taking double the money with them, besides a gift for the governor and Benjamin. Joseph was excited to see them. He knew they would have returned for more food, and when word reached him that they were in the city, he decided to give them a surprise of their lives. He sent them an invitation to dine in his house. They couldn't believe their ears. Dine with the governor? They were more frightened than ever. It's because of the money that is in our sacks, they said one to another. Now he is going to punish us and take us and make us bondsmen. In other words, he was going to take us and make us slaves. And the illustration down at the bottom is them taking Simeon and putting him in jail. And I'm sorry that I started crying, but that's the... Okay. Let's get back to the story. But they were mistaken. When they appeared before Joseph, he began to talk to them about their father. Is your father well? He asked. Is the old man of whom ye spake, is he yet alive? Thy servant our father is in good health, they replied, again bowing low before him. Suddenly Joseph caught sight of Benjamin, or Zephaniah caught sight of Benjamin, and was so overcome at seeing his little brother again that he hurried out of the room and burst into tears. That's going to make me cry every time. How he longed to throw his arms around him, but he dared not do it yet. Okay, let me see what Joseph did. Compose myself. Okay. Presently Joseph turned to the dining hall, seemingly quite calm, and ordered the meal to be served. He sat alone, apart from his Egyptian officers, while his brothers, being Hebrews, sat at another table, looking in amazement at the magnificent meal that had been provided for them. The Bible said they marveled one another, and more so when they saw how, by the governor's orders, Benjamin's plate was heaped with 5 times as much food as everybody else, and as anyone else. Yet still they did not guess who the governor was. Then Joseph played a trick on them. He gave orders that were their sacks to be filled with grain this time. His silver cup he put in and placed in Benjamin's sack. Presently the brothers set off for home, very proud of themselves and having been invited to the dinner with the governor of Egypt, and very happy that everything had turned out so well, after all. But soon they heard the sound of horses galloping, and looking around were horrified to find it was the governor's steward with a bodyguard coming to arrest them. Roughly the shrewd steward accused them of stealing from the governor's silver cup, which he greatly prized. Of course they denied doing such thing, and their blank looks were enough to convince anybody that they were innocent. But the steward demanded that the sacks be examined, and of course the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. What a sad journey that was back! What a sad journey that was back in the city. All their joy of the morning was gone. Now they were filled with new fears. Back at the governor's palace, they once more fell on their faces before Joseph, pleading their innocence. This is more than Joseph could stand. Suddenly he raised his voice in command, saying, cause every man to go out from me. So he said it in Egyptian. Cause every man to go out from me. And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known to his brother. In other words, he started talking to him in Hebrew, which they probably go, Noi? What a meeting was that? And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians of his house The Egyptians and the house of the Pharaoh heard. And then here at the bottom is the illustration. So even the Pharaoh heard that Joseph's brothers were there. And that's the silver cup. Okay. At first, the brothers wondered what all this meant. Then, as Joseph was able to control himself, in other words, he was really upset. And he was, giving them the thing, telling them everything. He said, I am Joseph. Doeth my father yet live? Then they were afraid. Joseph? Could this be Joseph? If it were, what would he do to them in revenge for all they had made him suffer? But there was no revenge in Joseph's heart, only love. He had forgiven them long ago, and all he wanted was to be friends again, or family. I would put family in there, my version. In their fears, they moved away from him, but he said, so gently, "Come near me. I come near to me. I pray you." In other words, he said that in Hebrew. And they came near, and he said, "I am Joseph your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. And now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that ye sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which there shall neither be earning nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth. P-O, posterity, posterity, you a prosperity, posterity, in the earth, and to save your lives from the great lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me hither, but God. How beautiful did he try to make all the worry out of their hearts. He didn't want them to blame themselves for what had happened. All was in the providence of God. Only a true nobleman could speak like this. Then he told them his plan to bring the whole family into the land of Goshen. 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 A section of Egypt where he could provide them with food through the 5 years of famine still to come. There will I nourish thee, he said, lest thou and thy household and all that thou hast come to poverty. In other words, come here so that you won't be poor. There was not a trace of meanness in Joseph's character. Powerful and wealthy though he was, he never once thought of trying to get even with these men who had been so cruel to him. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brethren, and wept upon them. Yes, he kissed them. Reuben, Simeon, Judah, each one. Even those who actually threw him into the pit and sold him into slavery. He kissed them. What love! What forgiveness! Surely he is indeed the noblest of them all. How God must have loved him for his greatness of spirit, and of the famine thereof was and the fame thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house. As the news passed from one to another, Joseph's brothers are come. And Joseph and the okay, get my brain straight. Let me read what it says. Pharaoh was pleased at what had happened and told Joseph to feel free to invite all his family to come and live in Egypt. And then it has a little picture of him stating who he is to his brothers in the Egyptian garb. And got more of the story. This story is long, but you think about it, this is a long story. Alright. Take your father and your household and come unto me. This is the Pharaoh. He said a generously move, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt. And he also ordered that wagons should be provided for the women and children, and Joseph's old father could travel in comfort. As a parting gift, Joseph gave to each of his brothers a change of raiment, meaning new clothes to wear, and to Benjamin 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of raiment. To his father he sent 10, there's that funny word again, but I'm going to say donkeys, laden with good things of Egypt, and 10 she donkeys laden with corn and bread, meant for his father by the way. In other words, 10 donkeys laden with corn and bread and meat for him for the travel. He tried to think of everything that would make them happy and at ease. Then, with a smile, remembering their their old weakness, he said to them as they left, see that ye fall not out by the way. When his brothers reached home, they all trooped into their old father's tent, crying, Joseph yet alive! Joseph is yet alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. Jacob would not believe them. It didn't seem possible. Why, the dear boy had been dead more than 20 years. He isn't dead, they kept saying. He is alive. We saw him and talked to him. And then they told him what had happened and all that Joseph had said to them. Still the old man would not believe them. Then they took him outside and showed him the wagons laden with good things which only Joseph's loving heart could have provided. Then he knew that the story must be true. A smile came on his face, and a new light shone in his eyes. It is enough, he cried. Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die. No time was lost in getting everything ready for the journey, for Jacob had now had but one idea on his mind: to see his precious Joseph again. As the caravan paused en route at Beersheba, Beersheba, Joseph offered up sacrifices of joy and thanksgiving to God. And that night God spake to him, saying, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here am I. And God said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down to Egypt, and I will also surely bring thee up again. And Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. In other words, basically in uh, Elizabethan, he will do the close his eyes thing. Okay? Cheered by this kindly message, Jacob went on his way with new courage. And the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, and their little ones, and their wives, and in the wagons which the Pharaoh had sent to carry him. And they took their cattle and their goods which they had gotten in the land of Canaan, and came to Egypt. How happy and excited Joseph must have been when news reached him that his father was near Egypt. And then it says, the Bible tells, and here's the other 10. I think Benjamin would probably still be with Joseph. This is my idea. But the other 10 came, and so showed. No, it says that Benjamin went. So, and then it said the Bible tells us that he made ready his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father to Goshen, and presented himself unto him. And he fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. In other words, they hugged each other for a good while, which means it could have been hours. And Israel said unto Joseph, Now let me die, since I seen thy face, because thou art yet alive. But he didn't die, not then. He was so happy to see Joseph again, he lived another 17 years. That's what it says. And Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions therein, and grew and multiplied exceedingly. Thus, though the faithfulness and loyalty of one noble, godly boy, thousands of people were saved from starvation. The seed of the woman was once more preserved, and the name of God of heaven, the God of Joseph, the God of Israel, had made known in all the world. And then it has the illustration of Joseph meeting Jacob, or Zephaniah meeting. And that's the end of part 1. And that was our last story. Let me rewind and see what story that was. And this has been a long story. The Noblest of All. And now we go to our next part and our stories. And we'll see what happens. It's getting good.